Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
We invite our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Madhusudan Babu, sir. He will be speaking on traditional versus newer oral anticoagulants.
Can I share my screen, please?
So, welcome, sir, Dr. Madhusudan Babu Garu. It's a great pleasure for me to invite sir to this conference. Myself being an alumni of Vizag, sir is now the superintendent of KGH and head of the Department of Medicine AMC. He graduated from uh, yeah, and sir has trained more than 120 postgraduate students, and he has got various papers in national and international conferences. And he's also the president of Vizag Neuro Club. And more than his academic and professional growth and his achievements, Sai is very approachable, always cheerful, and so nice to talk and interact with him. So today we'll discuss on a very nice topic. So far, for many years and decades, we have been using traditional anticoagulants. Now the newer ones have come and taken over the market, especially from the cardiology point of view, cardiologist side of point of view. So we'll see how much these are good enough for our neurological diseases, and invite sir to start the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Astor. Is my screen visible and I'm audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Very much, sir.
Okay, thank you. At the outset, I thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to talk in this forum. Before I start my talk, I pay my respects to our senior professor, my guide, Professor V. Satyanarayana Garu, who passed away recently. Coming to my topic, Dr. Balbhadra Venkatraj asked me to talk on traditional versus newer anticoagulants. If it is one, it's okay, but both traditional and newer anticoagulants, it makes a big chapter. So I will try to concise and try to be brief on this subject. This we know this diagram since our physiology days. These are vitamin K dependent factors, and this is extrinsic pathway where tissue damage activates 7A. And final common pathway is factor 10A, which converts prothrombin into thrombin, and that converts fibrinogen to fibrin monomer and then polymer with the help of factor 13. And now the latest drugs act either on factor 10A or direct thrombin inhibitors. So, coming to the oral anticoagulants, we have vitamin K antagonist anticoagulant like warfarin, and direct acting direct thrombin inhibitors like dabigatran, and factor 10A inhibitors rivaroxaban, apixaban, and doxaban. Among parenteral, we are familiar with unfractionated heparin and low molecular weight heparin. Coming to the history, in 1920s, a type of hemorrhagic disease struck the cattle in North Dakota and Alberta, and they have isolated a causative agent that is dicumarol. But in 1940s that came into the medical use, and the products were azinocumarol and then warfarin, which we are using most commonly. Coming to the heparin and low molecular weight heparin, heparin is usually endogenously produced linear polysaccharide isolated from porcine or bovine intestines with a molecular weight of 15,000 daltons. Whereas low molecular weight heparins, they are derived from enzymatic depolymerization of unfractionated heparin with a molecular weight of 4,000 to 5,000 daltons. Whereas fondaparinux is a pentasaccharide with only 5 saccharides and with a molecular weight of 1700 dalton. So the lesser the molecular weight, the more specific will be the action. So this broadly gives us the action. Unfractionated heparin inhibits both thrombin as well as factor A. Low molecular weight heparin has less effect on thrombin and it inhibits factor 10A. Whereas fondaparinux inhibits only factor 10A. This is the mode of action of these heparins. And renal function effects. This heparin, the renal function does not affect elimination and therefore does not usually, we don't have to alter heparin in the usual doses, usual therapeutic doses. Whereas low molecular weight heparins are metabolized in the liver and excreted by the kidney. So we should be careful in giving low molecular heparins when the creatinine clearance falls less than 30 ml per minute. So what are the advantages of this heparin? Because once you give heparin, it has rapid onset and offset of action, allowing more flexibility in dose titration, and we can discontinue whenever it is needed. So monitoring is also easy. We are all having APTT, anti-factor N activity is available, and we can monitor easily. We can use in renal failure, and you have extensive clinical experience with heparins, and ability to reverse activity by protamine sulfate. And we have choice by both intravenous as well as subcutaneous route administration. Coming to the disadvantages, because of the short half-life, it needs continuous infusion to obtain the therapeutic levels. Of course, for venous thromboembolic episodes, you have subcutaneous route administration. And it is highly variable dose-response relationship necessitating frequent laboratory monitoring. And achieving and maintaining therapeutic levels is often challenging with this heparin. And there are no oral formulations. And this is another thing which we are usually encounter: heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, then of course skin reactions and osteoporosis and long-term use. Then potentially increased risk of hemorrhagic complications compared to low molecular weight heparins. And there is an entity known as heparin resistance, where once the daily requirement is more than 35,000 units, excluding the bolus doses, we call it as in resistance to heparin. Then what about low molecular weight heparins? The advantages are it is a greater bioavailability than unfractionated heparin. Extensive clinical experience, all of us are familiar with these drugs, and once or twice daily administration in the outpatient setting, and administration of a fixed dose without laboratory monitoring, lower risk of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, and lower incidence of osteoporosis. Disadvantages are onset of action is 20 to 30 minutes when compared to heparin, which the action is immediate. Then longer duration of action, making it more difficult to rapidly stop the therapy, and it is less easily inactivated with protamine sulfate. And prolonged half-life in patients with renal failure, especially enoxaparin. If monitoring is required, this may be difficult. Anti-factor Xa activity testing with a rapid turnaround time is not available in all places. These are the preparations which we use. Then coming to vitamin K antagonists, they are indicated, all of us know the indications: atrial fibrillation, acute coronary syndrome, heart failure, prosthetic heart valve, stroke, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, and antiphospholipid syndrome. Then advantages with this warfarin, this vitamin K antagonist is we have a large clinical experience. All of us have used this drug, and greater efficacy in the prosthetic heart valves, because we cannot give other drugs in prosthetic heart valves. It has to be vitamin K antagonist. Then low cost and wide availability, and it is that drug that we have to use in antiphospholipid syndrome, and desired anticoagulant effect even in patients with advanced renal insufficiency. So it can be given in advanced renal insufficiencies. We can get the adequate concentrations. Then higher rate of thromboembolic bleeding and complication in individual with atrial fibrillation. Requirement for frequent monitoring with associated costs and burdens, because it has to be this INR should be done very frequently. Dosing is affected by illness, changes in diet, numerous interacting medications. And green leafy vegetables interferes a lot with warfarin, and we know it contains large amount of vitamin K1, and many drugs interfere. It's very difficult to remember all the drugs. What I usually do is, whenever I start this drug, I ask the patient what drugs he is taking, and I see is there any reaction for that, and ask him to hold the green leafy vegetables. And to memorize, for those who can memorize, they have given some tips like O devices and crab bars, and these drugs, omeprazole, disulfiram, erythromycin, valproate, isoniazid, ciprofloxacin, sulfonamides, all these things potentiates, whereas these drugs which we use in epilepsy, especially carbamazepine, phenytoin, barbiturates, they all decrease the effects of that, and alcohol reforms and sulfonylurea gas. But it's difficult to remember all the things, so we should always check the drugs which is taking before we start this drug. Then, because these other newer drugs are mostly depending upon the renal elimination, oral anticoagulants, direct oral anticoagulants should not be given in stages 4 and 5, CKD stage 4 and 5. Once the renal uh, clearance is less than 30, then you should be careful and you should not use the direct acting oral anticoagulants. And this is a randomized evaluation of long-term anticoagulation therapy trial. In this, how to adjust dose of warfarin in relation to the INR that they have given. Like if it is less than 1.5, increase by 15% per week. If it is 1.5 to 1.99, increase 10% per week. 2 to 3 as what we want. And if it is 3 to 4, then decrease 10% per week. If it is 4 to 4.99, hold one dose and then start 10% lesser dose. And if it's more than 5, hold until INR is 2 to 3. Restart the dose, decrease by 15% per week. And the complications, all of us know, bleeding, skin necrosis, teratogenicity, especially in teratogenicity in pregnancy, cholesterol embolization, vascular calcifications, nephropathy, all these are complications with these drugs, skin necrosis. And now coming to the direct oral anticoagulants, this is dabigatran is the drug which we commonly most of us are using. Of course, we are using other drugs also. Dabigatran etoxalate is an oral product that is rapidly converted by serum esterase to dabigatran. It is a direct competitive inhibitor of factor 2A, that is thrombin. It is a direct thrombin inhibitor. Because of predictable pharmacokinetics, dabigatran can be administered at a fixed dose and does not require coagulation monitoring. So dabigatran pharmacokinetics are affected by renal function because 80% is excreted renally, but it is not metabolized by cytochrome 450 system. So it is not affected by drugs that potentiate or inhibit this system. Whereas it is definitely affected by P-glycoprotein inhibitors such as ketoconazole, amiodarone, verapamil, and quinidine. Then coming to the rivaroxaban, this is a competitive inhibitor of factor 10A, and its half-life is 5 to 9 hours. Administered as a fixed dose without coagulation monitoring, and it is metabolized by CYP348 system, that is cytochrome P450 system. And so all the drugs that potentiates like clarithromycin, erythromycin, diltiazem, these are all inhibitors. And then inducers are phenobarbital, phenytoin, and rifampicin. Then rivaroxaban is metabolized by this system again, so this is affected by all those medicines. Clearance is both by renal as well as fecal, unchanged. They are excreted in urine and feces. Apixaban is also competitive inhibitor of 10A and almost same this thing, but long acting this thing. And apixaban is metabolized again by the same systems. Clearance again is both renal as well as fecal. And we'll quickly go through some studies. This is RELACE trial in which they have shown, they have compared dabigatran versus warfarin in non-valvular atrial fibrillation, and they have shown that dabigatran 150 milligrams twice a day was superior, and dabigatran 110 milligrams twice a day was non-inferior to warfarin in preventing stroke and systemic embolism in patients with atrial fibrillation. So this study has shown the superiority or non-inferiority of dabigatran in two different doses. I have put up this here because this has come in last year's JAMA Neurology. The safety and efficacy of dabigatran versus dose-adjusted warfarin in patients with cerebral venous thrombosis. Dose-adjusted means according to INR, the dose is adjusted. And this I kept it here because most of us might be interested in cerebral venous thrombosis. And I will go a bit into detail into the study because this is a new thing that has come recently. This objective of the study was to compare the efficacy and safety of dabigatran etiolate with warfarin in preventing recurrent venous thromboembolisms in patients who have experienced CVT. Then coming to the design, it is an exploratory, prospective, randomized, parallel group, open label, multi-central clinical trial with blinded endpoint adjudication, that is probe design. And it was performed from December 21st of 2016 to June 22nd of 2018 in follow-up for 25 weeks in 51 tertiary sites in 9 countries. So, adult consecutive patients with CVT who are stable for 5 to 15 days of treatment with parenteral heparin were screened for eligibility. So, initially they are given 5 to 15 days parenteral heparin, then they were taken into the study. Patients with CVT associated with central nervous system infection or major trauma were excluded. But those with intracranial hemorrhage from index CVT case were allowed to participate. After exclusions, 120 patients were randomized in all these centers, and the interventions were dabigatran 150 milligrams twice daily or dose-adjusted warfarin for a treatment period of 24 weeks. The primary outcome was either recurrent CVT, deep vein thrombosis of any limb, pulmonary embolism, or splanchnic vein thrombosis, or major bleeding during the study period. Secondary outcomes were cerebral venous recanalization and clinically relevant non-major bleeding events. These are secondary. So the conclusions and relevance of the study are patients who had CVT anticoagulated with either dabigatran or warfarin had low risk of recurrent VTEs, venous thromboembolic phenomena, and the risk of bleeding was similar in both medications, suggesting that both dabigatran and warfarin may be safe and effective in preventing recurrent VTEs in patients with CVT. I have a small experience with this drug. I have used it in 13 patients and 12 responded well. One patient did not improve, for whom I have to start heparin infusion followed by warfarin, with which he has improved well. So the dabigatran does work, and we can, when monitoring is not possible, I think we can definitely look at the dabigatran. Still further studies are have to come for us to give a standard guidelines. And this is another study, early start of DOAC for ischemic. How early we have to start? They have given either less than 7 days or more than 7 days. Early means or less than 7 days. More late means they said more than 7 days. And it is published in Neurology in 2016. And the conclusion of the study was, even if DOAs are often started early after an index event, the risk of ICH appears to be low. So you can start direct oral anticoagulants in early period. Within less than 1 week, we can start them on this direct acting oral anticoagulants. Among all patients receiving anticoagulation, the rate of recurrent events was 6 times higher than the rate of ICH. So you can start these drugs early. This is a meta-analysis published in BMJ in 2017, in which the data sources were Medline, pre-Medline, Embase and the Cochrane Library. The objective was to compare the efficacy, safety, and cost effectiveness of direct acting oral anticoagulants for patients with atrial fibrillation. So, what they have concluded, what this study adds to us, to our knowledge, these direct acting oral anticoagulants as a class reduce the risk of stroke and all-cause mortality in patients with atrial fibrillation, and are safer with respect to major and intracranial bleeding than warfarin. So, they have given a clear-cut upper hand in this study. Our cost effectiveness analysis provides that despite their higher cost, several DOAs are preferable to warfarin. Then they found that apixaban 5 milligrams twice daily was the highest expected incremental net benefit. So apixaban followed by rivaroxaban, edoxaban, and then dabigatran. This is the analysis of this meta-analysis study. Then without atrial fibrillation, deep vein thrombosis, this study was taken from Stroke, Journal of Stroke in 2018, and this shows direct acting oral anticoagulant shows superior safety to warfarin in terms of risk of ICH in patients with DVT. So in this study also, without atrial fibrillation, deep vein thrombosis or pulmonary embolism, these patients DOAs show superior safety than warfarin. Then this is another article in JAMA Neurology. Rivaroxaban versus warfarin, the two are compared in ultra early period of atrial fibrillation related to mild ischemic stroke, randomized clinical trial published in JAMA Neurology in 2017. So they have compared rivaroxaban and warfarin sodium in patients with AF-related acute ischemic stroke. A randomized multi-center open-label blind-ended point evaluation compared to phase 2 trial at 14 academic medical centers in South Korea, and they have concluded that in mild AF-related acute ischemic stroke, rivaroxaban and warfarin had comparable safety and efficacy. So both were comparable in this study. Then there is another study, early recurrence of major bleeding in patients with acute ischemic stroke and atrial fibrillation treated with non-vitamin K oral coagulant, RAFNOC study, that is published in Journal of American Heart Association 2017. And in that, they have concluded that in patients with acute ischemic stroke and atrial fibrillation, treatment with NOAs are associated with a combined 5% rate of ischemic embolic recurrence and bleeding within 90 days. So, in 90 days, the combined ischemic and hemorrhagic events are only 5% according to this study. The rate of ischemic and hemorrhagic outcome events was 60% lower than the RAF study that included mainly patients treated with vitamin K antagonists. So, this also shows the superiority of DOACs compared to vitamin K antagonists. So this study says a non-vitamin K oral anticoagulants could be used within 2 weeks from the stroke onset, given the seemingly acceptable risk of severe bleeding. And there was an editorial anticoagulation timing for atrial fibrillation and acute ischemic stroke in JAMA Neurology, published in 2011 September. And they recommended that anticoagulation of atrial fibrillation should be started 3 days after a mild ischemic stroke and 12 days after a severe stroke. They take the criteria of mild and severe. Mild means they took diffusion perfusion of the MRI images, and less than 1/3 of MCA atrial infarct and less than half of ACA atrial infarct they have taken, and in them they have started these drugs within less than 3 days. So, in summary, this triple XL trial, early anticoagulation with a direct oral anticoagulant and warfarin in patients with a mild stroke is feasible, but whether this is of benefit to all patients with acute stroke and AF has yet to be demonstrated. And this is another study which was published in 2011 in New England Journal of Medicine. rivaroxaban versus warfarin in non-valvular atrial fibrillation, with a conclusion that rivaroxaban was non-inferior to warfarin for the prevention of stroke or systemic embolism. The Averroes trial was terminated in between, in the middle, when the interim analysis found that apixaban was superior to aspirin. This trial compared apixaban and aspirin. So, what are the latest AHA recommendations for this? And it's very difficult to go through these congested slides because these are the recommendations, so we cannot change anything in them. And I will go through briefly the recommendation, but finally I will give a gist of these recommendations. So, warfarin and DOACs all are indicated for the prevention of first and recurrent stroke in patients with non-valvular AF. So, both are indicated. That is one guideline. Then selection of antithrombotic agents should be individualized on the basis of risk factors, cost, tolerability, etc. And the next recommendation is dabigatran 150 mg twice daily is an effective alternative to warfarin, provided the creatinine clearance is more than 30 ml per minute. And if the creatinine clearance is less than 30 ml, that's 15 to 30 ml per minute, dabigatran can be tried in 75 milligrams twice a daily dose, but its safety and efficacy have not been established. The class 2B level of evidence C for this recommendation. And dabigatran is not recommended in patients with creatinine clearance less than 15 ml. So if the creatinine clearance less than 15 ml, dabigatran should not be used. That is another strong recommendation. And then coming to the apixaban versus aspirin. Apixaban 5 milligrams twice daily is an efficacious alternative to aspirin in patients with non-valvular AF deemed unsuitable for vitamin K antagonist therapy. So the patient is not fit to give vitamin K antagonist. So instead of giving aspirin, the apixaban is proved to be superior to it. And they had additional risk factor and no more than one of the following categories. These three are taken in the guidelines: age more than 80 years, weight less than 60, serum creatinine more than 1.5. So if it's more than one of this is available, this apixaban 5 mg twice daily is advised. Then if the risk factors are 2 or more, that is age 80 years, weight, and then serum creatinine 2 or more, then apixaban is given at 2.5 milligrams twice daily. Then warfarin and apixaban. Apixaban 5 milligrams twice daily is a relatively safe and efficacious alternative to warfarin in patients with non-valvular AF. Okay. So the other recommendation is at least if additional risk factors more than 2 or more, then this apixaban 2.5 milligrams twice daily was advised. So apixaban 2.5 milligrams twice daily is better than warfarin in those who have one risk factor and the 2 or more of the following criteria. Apixaban should not be used if the creatinine clearance is less than 25 ml per minute. Then the 10th recommendation is regarding rivaroxaban, and rivaroxaban 20 milligrams per day is reasonable as an alternative to warfarin. Then if the creatinine clearance of 15 to 50 ml per minute, then 15 milligrams of rivaroxaban daily may be considered. Then the 12th recommendation is rivaroxaban should not be used if creatinine clearance is less than 15 ml. And the safety and efficacy of combining dabigatran, rivaroxaban or apixaban and DOAC should not be when they are combined with antiplatelet agent, that has not been established. So there is no use of combining antiplatelet drugs with direct acting anticoagulants. Then the conditions, heparin or vitamin K may be preferable in prosthetic valves, pregnancy, severe liver disease, and antiphospholipid syndrome. In this, there is no doubt that only vitaminic antagonists are chosen. And also gastrointestinal disease, history of bleeding. Individual with severe dyspepsia, they may not tolerate dabigatran. And dosing convenience, of course, rivaroxaban and edoxaban also once daily dose, and as warfarin. And cost effectiveness we have to see in our country. Finally, before I wind up, this is the latest journal published in June 2020, where direct oral anticoagulant use, a practical guide to common clinical challenges. They have given certain recommendations for these drugs. Dabigatran indications are same for almost all the drugs. So just go through this slide. The rest of the things I will go pass off. FDA approved indications: stroke prevention in non-valvular AF. Number 1. Number 2, treatment of deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. Third indication is prevention of recurrent deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. Then prevention of thromboembolism after total hip replacement. These are the FDA approved indications. Then off-label indications are prevention of thromboembolism after total knee replacement, prevention of thromboembolism after percutaneous interventions with non-valvular atrial fibrillation. Next, again, same indication for rivaroxaban. And for apixaban, other thing that was added is treatment of heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. It is off-label indication. Otherwise, almost same. Edoxaban. So finally, before I wind up, this is the score. Basing on this, the above study has given recommendations. CHADS2 vascular score, and you know how the name has arrived. This is the way the name has come, and the total are 10 points in this. And what is the take home message after going through all these trials and other things? Anticoagulant therapy is strongly recommended for atrial fibrillation related stroke prevention in men with a score of 2 or more, and in women with a score of 3 or more. In women with a score of 1 and in women with score of 2, anticoagulation should be discussed with the patient, and if the patient agrees, you can start. Men with a score of 0 and women with a score of 1 do not need to be anticoagulated. DOACs are preferred to warfarin for stroke prevention in atrial fibrillation because there is less bleeding with these agents than with the warfarin, and they are as effective or more effective compared with warfarin at preventing stroke in patients with atrial fibrillation. Patients with mitral stenosis and prosthetic mechanical mitral valve should not receive DOAC to prevent stroke. Warfarin should be prescribed. Then anticoagulation therapy is indicated in patients with atrial fibrillation with paroxysmal, persistent, or permanent atrial fibrillation. Whatever the type, that is indicated. Similarly, atrial flutter should be given the same importance as atrial fibrillation, and same type of treatment should be started. And in guidelines, the dabigatran did not acquire a seat for prevention of CVT, for treatment of CVT, and probably more studies will bring that into the guidelines. And thank you for the patient hearing. Thank you.